Hi, Tim. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
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 So the call yesterday was really interesting, actually.
I missed it.
Yeah, we went into Jonathan's ideas. I don't know if you saw his post about things he put in judgment aggregation and social epistemology. I was not aware of that field because I'm not 100% convinced it's absolutely vital, meaning the previous work. His work is interesting. But basically, there's been this work in saying, you know, there's a paradox in social aggregation that people, if you look at aggregated social beliefs, you can have inconsistency. And he's saying a lot of the inconsistency can be resolved with the Bayesian framework. And that's why he's doing this distributed Bayesian stuff. And that I think is highly interesting. And then I directed him to Pearl, etc. But that was a good conversation around the value of having a distributed Bayesian network. I don't think this contradicts anything of what we've been doing. It's just kind of another layer. Okay. What I don't have a big agenda ready. I think we should continue the conversation we had 2 days ago, if you're all fine with it.
Which was?
Hey, you made the...
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, but I just didn't know which one you meant. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
The base layer versus canonical layer. I understand better now why you speak of layers. I wasn't clear before, but now I'm much clearer, and that's totally aligns with what I want to do.
And what I got from last meeting is that we are pretty much aligned. If we keep out all infrastructural technical perspectives out of it, it sounds like we're conceptually more or less aligned. And Timothy was still a bit hesitant on whether or not these are use cases he wants to support, like concretely, whether or not you want to, should support contributing arguments to old claims. I think that's where we were at, right? So I think a question towards Timothy is, are you more convinced this is a valid use case, or is it still a use case you're convinced of you don't want to support, or like
the use case? Yeah, I don't know if the use case is well defined. The use case of contributing to old stuff isn't a well-defined use case. The use case for that's actually listed, which is somebody wants to make a blog post, and you see the debate and you see it evolve or whatever, is something I want to support. Although, you know, then there's questions about what does seeing it evolve mean, and you know, it's a little loose in terms of what they're seeing in the first place, right? In terms of, you know, the size of the graph they're seeing and all that stuff. But,
well, but the use case is that users can still contribute. So if you say no, regardless of whether it evolved, to put it differently, the reason it's not reflected in the use case, the old claim, is because a claim in the current use case is never old. There might be indeed like suggested rephrasings and improvements, but it's never old in the sense that you can no longer use it, or in whatever sense. But that is the use.
Well, a claim, yeah, I mean, a claim in the canonical debate, in my approach to it, is never old. I mean, it never goes away, right? Like, if there's been edits or whatever, in whatever way that happened, it's still the same claim, right? I guess the one place it's not still the same claim is if there's a split. If a claim is split.
But then you would, so the point here is, if the claim is split, that blog post would still be posting to the thing where it's split from, and Where it's split from, you can still contribute. That's what we're discussing.
Okay, I'd like to rephrase it a bit differently. I had said 2 days ago, and I think it's important to see it from that perspective. We have an older version, for example, pre-split or pre-concept evolution, shouldn't matter. And we have a newer version, which is now according to the upper layer, sorry, we're a bit mid-conversation. I'll try to hopefully make sense. So we're speaking about a case where we agree that there's a layer where claims are immutable, and that evolution takes the form of saying this would be a good replacement for that, and there may be a split, there may be evolution. We have things that will point to a version before the replacement, and assume that we have some curation mechanism that means that the replacement is accepted and that it is the proper, better, for some metric of better version of the original claim. And I think something we both agree on, we don't necessarily agree on whether should people be available to add arguments to the old version or the new version or the equivalence class. But I think the end result we want is the same, is that we want, if we make a new argument about either old, new, or equivalence class, people will see this new argument as possibly applying to any of the three, no matter where it was put originally.
Yeah, they link.
I think that's the aim, the common aim.
Let's discuss what I think is a manageable, concrete example, right? And the split case is the one that got me thinking about this. Let's say that a blog poster wants people to debate President Biden is senile and should not be followed, right? Okay.
It's a claim.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine that being curated into a claim that President is senile, and then an argument claim that is President Biden should not be followed because he is senile, right?
Yeah, but the blog post goes to the original one, which somehow was accepted, right? Because we're talking about accepted immutable claims. So what do you do?
So what do you do? Well, my approach would be that they can link to their specific contribution at a moment. Part of the question is, what are you showing at that point, right? I can imagine a link to go there. But I wouldn't want contribution to happen right on the blog post, for example. I would want somebody to link and go there and it would say, oh, this is an out-of-date claim. It has now been restructured into he's senile and therefore should not be followed. And here are the arguments. Go ahead and participate.
Well, okay, well, let's stop right there. So yeah, you're saying, so this is really where the crux lies. You are saying somebody has decided, a group has decided that there's now a new claim that you should talk about instead, right? The discussion is that something that you want to enforce? Or is that something that you always want to allow people to continue talking that might disagree that there's another claim you should actually be talking about to continue the discussion on the original one?
I would like there to be a mechanism that essentially enforces that. I mean, there's all the governance questions of how that happens, and especially given I don't want decisions to be made by the system.
But this is a case where a decision is made by
yes, I'm contradicting
someone.
myself. Yes, right. So I know I'm contradicting myself somewhat. I know there's a trade-off. It's just I don't see the two goals as being fully compatible, and a trade-off has to be made somewhere, right?
I don't see the contradiction myself, because what I said is I understand what you're saying. People should not talk on the blog post. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's not, I don't care. honestly. What we agree on is they'll make answer to one of the two forms of the claim, the old one or the new one, and you want to enforce that it's on the new one because it's clearer.
You want to
And
encourage if people.
I want to encourage, exactly. I'm all for encourage versus enforce, because the reality is some people will have made arguments on the previous form.
Exactly.
And that means those arguments will have to be refactored and say, well, actually what you meant was, and then hopefully, let's say people agree, but maybe not, right? And again, there's also always a possibility of, no, this is not the right formalization, and it should have been formalized this other way, which.
So yeah, which goes to the question, and that's why I keep arguing for this immutable base layer. Where do you go to with these disagreements in your envisioned scenario? And then you might say, oh, we're going to build some curation mechanisms. And what I'm saying is these curation mechanisms are in the base layer. You can go to the base layer to discuss these things. If you allow these arguments to stay there, you can argue in the base layer whether or not in a higher level filtered layer things should be shown one way or the other.
Yeah, but your base layer is the same as my layer. The only difference is I want there to be a timestamp.
You want a
and a
decision to be made.
relationship that says something
No,
is.
But that's what I think what Stephen is proposing, and I see the distinction, I think the way he proposes it makes sense to me, is there's all the claims that this claims translate to this, and they may be diverging. And then there's the canonical debate's role, and it's a valid role and it's a valid use case, is, let's say, here is what the community has decided is the clearest expression of that claim.
Or a community.
Or a community. And I meant the canonical debate community, but it's a community, of course. And hence, let's, in this community, work on this one. And that means if you work on another one, fine, maybe, but let's try to translate it to this canonical version. And if somebody in another community federation case, sorry, argues on the other one, it has to be translated. Or if they've done it before the final form was achieved, which it has to be translated. But more important to me is the other way. It has to go both ways, either way. So that's why I don't care. It's that if somebody makes a new argument on the latest form, right, and somebody linked to the old form, ideally they should know, oh, by the way, your link is to the old form, but if we look at how that form evolved, there's this argument that's probably relevant, maybe not. Maybe the evolution is such that you don't accept that what applies to this other version applies to your version. Could be, that's an argument and needs to be noted as such. But most of the time, the argument made against the new form has to apply backwards to the old form. And that, or has to at least be proposed to argue to apply backwards to the old form. So the person can decide, yeah, that's also valid in my old version. And maybe I'll update, maybe in my, here's my blog post, and here's all the pointers I had to various old forms that I made at the time. I can say, yeah, I'm okay with the new expression, which means I'm updating the metadata around my blog post to say, I'm now okay with the new expression. And that means any argument made about the new expression applies to my data because I validated that it still expresses my intent.
Yeah, my problem isn't with the approach and it could work or whatever. It's that I see in the mechanism of trying to let everybody debate everything as defeating exactly the goal of focusing on the actual debate, the substance, and not the structure. And so if every single person has to, oh, do I want to accept that this is relevant in this structure? Do I want to follow that structure as being overhead for each user that is just going to...
But you presume there that each user has to do that. I don't think that's the case. I think that, I mean, it should be encouraged not to do that, but there should be a place to go to if you disagree. I mean, I think in one of the recent meetings you said yourself, the last thing you want to do is not be able to discuss something because you will chase away people like, oh, I don't want to contribute here because my voice is not heard. I'm paraphrasing. You said something similar. that's exactly what I'm trying to prevent from happening here by having a space to go to where you can go if you disagree. That choice, because it's a choice that is being made at some point by a subset of people that make a decision from now on. This is an equivalence clause. From now on, this is the best way to represent this. From now on, and people may disagree.
Yeah, but what I think is happening is that you're not really resolving the problem. What you're doing is giving them a different rabbit hole to chase down and say, nobody ever listens to me because, like, I think it should be structured this other way, and I keep submitting this and nobody listens to me. You're chasing down
they would make like, it would be concrete. It would be that they could say, no, that claim does not mean the same thing than the other claim, and they can argue why, because it's a claim, right? In a base layer, saying one claim is equivalent to another claim could be a claim that you can agree or disagree with. If a community agrees with that, from that point onwards, you can enact on that and you can represent in the canonical claim as such. If you disagree with that, you can start arguing why that isn't the case.
My solution to that specific problem is don't argue about it. Create another one with exactly the changes you think need to be made that distinguish that one from your. Like, don't spend the time arguing it should be different. Go ahead and create a new claim. Put the definitions you think, make it clearer exactly what you think. But
this is exactly what we're saying, Tim. When we say disagree, of course, it's meaningless to disagree unless you create a new claim. But it's about being able to say, hey, I wouldn't have interpreted this way. I would have interpreted it that way. And I disagree with this interpretation because I have this alternative.
Yeah.
What is the point of that? No, it's not the same thing.
Tim,
because you start a debate over, are these things different, right?
Carl?
Go ahead, Carl.
I was just gonna say, I mean, something you just said kind of stood out to me, which is that, what you're saying is the person should go create their own separate claim and add their own definitions. But to me, that's worse, because now, I mean, people are going to do that, right? They're going to create all these separate, claims. And if there's not a relationship, like a way to try to, connect people and say, okay, yes, you came here, but you should be aware that this one's highly related, or you're here, you may prefer this one. That's worse, I would say, to have these little islands of argument, because I think one of the goals of canonical is to sort of point people through their own ability to reason, their own, background and preferences towards what they think they're really trying to talk about. And so, yeah.
Right, but that relationship should be made through the definition. Right, and ideally the canonical structure, which says, here are two claims that have the exact same formula, logical structure, but all the definitions are the same except for one differing definition. That's an easy way to say these two claims are related, right? You don't have to have a specific,
This may be me being just kind of out. Sorry, just maybe kind of have a loop, and apologize for that. But so are we sort of, is the consensus now towards sort of a formulaic representation as opposed to like a strictly textual? Okay, we're still kind of uncertain about that. Okay, I wasn't sure if that.
No, you're a perfectly valid question. I mean, there is an open question about whether all differences of definitions can be resolved to differences of formula for some formula system. I certainly believe in the value of having formula for resolving a kind of 80-20 and that, but I don't believe it will cover all the cases myself. Any one system will cover all the cases. So I want to allow people to express things. However, where I agree with what Carl was saying earlier is if you have, okay, I'm saying this formalizes or interprets as that, you're saying add the definition if you disagree, which is absolutely fine. Then there should be a work saying, well, the actual specific distinction between those two definitions is X, so it's well defined how they're different. Or if not, well, I think those are actually equivalent. They're not that different. So I'm proposing an equivalence class. And if you don't think they're equivalent, please tell me what the distinction is, because I don't see it. Or maybe proposing a new synthesis. I think what those definitions have is common is this, and where they differ is that, and that's what I call the refactoring. I think that's an essential thing. It's you say, here's the common part, here's the distinction part, but those are clearer than the original variants of ambiguity fork. But those are all what's important. And this is, I think, totally a second layer operation, is to favor, as in scoring, synthesis concepts to divergence concepts. It's about saying if one of the many definitions is accepted by enough people to be the best consensus definition, not necessarily we agree with the claim, but we agree with the definitions in the claim, then that definition is the one that will be proposed as canonical. And so that we can avoid the plethora of divergent definitions. So not only a mechanism, I think the mechanism for divergence is fundamental, but the mechanism for convergence, and that's totally a layer 2 scoring mechanism, is also essential.
Yeah, I think, a lot of these questions just come down to how it would play out in practice, which makes it really hard to argue these points.
But
I think you could say, that, for example, if this structure creates a lot of bifurcation, a lot of people arguing old points, and we're not accumulating information, we should try the other approach. If the approach of forcing people to adhere to a structure somebody else decides leads to people revolting against it and not using it, then it should go the other way.
And those are empirical points, fair enough.
It makes it so hard to debate this. Yeah.
No, there I'm with you.
But as long, I mean, I think what we do agree on is we want to encourage, when there is consensus, that what we disagree on is how consensus is achieved. And I think what I'm suggesting with the whole base layer notion is, it is the mechanism through which consensus can be achieved. I mean, you're going to have to, when you decide to do these curation actions, you're probably going to collect a number of votes and stuff like that. For me, that's the equivalent of just seeing like, oh, 100 people agree, it's the same claim, 3 people disagree, and then as a community, you can decide from now on we'll treat them the same. Like, how are you going to do all these similar things? So my base here is simply a fundamental abstract notion where you can both go to argue if you disagree, but where you can also vote to get consensus mechanisms to work.
Yeah,
that's one approach, right? But I am possibly in favor of an elite class of curators. Part of the question is balancing also scalability, and not system scalability. I'm talking about crowdsourcing scalability, where if every single little curation decision has to be decided by a committee of 100 voters, how long does it take to evolve and clean up the thing? Is it going to be readable fast enough? Right.
Let's look at it from an architecture perspective, because you can still not make the base layer public. You can deploy that totally privately and only host second layer 2 and only provide people access to that, and not have, I mean, the way I envision it, if you structure the entire architecture in a base layer and layer 2, you can still decide whether or not to allow people to have arguments on the base on the base layer or not, or only allow the elite curators, like you say, to give access there.
I agree with that.
I don't.
And well,
no, you don't want to do that. I don't want to do that either, my point. But I'm saying, if we implement this, we don't need to all agree on how to deploy it. We can still later deploy it however you see fit, to depending on which way it swings, right? Whether or not it scares away people or not, you can deploy differently.
I hear you. I hear you. No, what I'm hoping is, okay, there's 2 things. One is, I agree there's an empirical question there. And by the way, I hear your concern, Tim, about making the system require too much of the user. I don't think I've solved that conundrum yet. And it does concern me, and there's a usability question. And how can we do crowdsourcing to avoid that? It's a perfectly valid question. I don't have an answer for it yet. But what I think Stephen is trying to do with the layers is, can we have something that is neutral towards this empirical fact in the base layer? And so we can try both approaches and see what works, and maybe come up with a third one if neither works, and whatever. And there I agree. But that means at the interrupt level, we have to share the base layer, because otherwise we cannot do those experiments unless we actually share the base layers. So a bit of a veto. Now, if you tell me, Tim, I don't see how I can implement my tactic on the base layer as defined, that's a perfectly valid concern that we need, we all need to address. But I do think it's possible to address your tactic using the base layer.
Right, the base layer should be somehow a superset of things we want to do, right? Yeah. With the restriction there, the trade-off there, it needs to be a superset that doesn't take an infinite amount of time to implement because we want to support everything, right? And I do think that this specific case of curation, right, is what I would accept as being essentially layer 2, right? And it does seem like there is a way to, okay, we've been accepting, people have been wasting their time on old debates that went nowhere, and we're just going to cut that off now. We can change the functionality, flip a switch, and end it from there. And it's done. There is a deeper question. There's a harder question there of, how hard will it be to manage seeing that an argument made over here applies over there? How complex will that graph become, and how manageable will that be if we're not doing the hedge trimming that I think curation should be doing, right? Maybe that's also a empirical thing.
It's a perfectly valid question. I mean, I'm banging my head against the question of, what if the equivalence classes are not the same? How do I express that visually? It's absolutely not obvious. Though I'm beginning to think in those terms and beginning to have elements of solution. But I mean, it's the real question, right? How do you say, well, this is the one that has the most people supporting it, and here are where people differ. And sometimes you want to, and there's a weird balance between, if I encourage the consensus view, so the consensus view will probably have a kind of, pay lip service to many other views, right? And then if there's suppose I want to say, okay, if you want to explore further, here are other views. Now, on the one hand, I want to say, well, those views were covered in the consensus view, so let's actually show you something new that was not in the consensus view. But that encourages really fringe stuff, which is not good either. So here there's a whole balance thing between encouraging coverage, and let's make sure you've seen all the possible views, and not.
But as long as you show how popular these views are, you can see whether it's fringe or not. So it's just a matter of showing these are fringe views, but just so you know they're there, and some people believe in them.
Yeah, but one thing that we were saying with Jonathan yesterday, which I think was extremely.
But in this case, fringe view, you're talking not about opinions on a debate. You're talking about fringe meta views, as in fringe versions of the graph, right? Not actually someone has a radical political opinion. It's that it's a view, a structure of the graph that most people don't agree with seeing, right?
I'm speaking about both, actually, in the sense that for me, it's essential that the metagraph and the graph be expressed kind of together, because for me, a graph that doesn't include the meta debate is flawed. And that way, some fringe will be fringe idea, and has to be there. It has to be, and the question is not about excluding; it's about ordering, right? It's about scoring. the fringe meta organization or fringe refactorings are a case for me that should be visible as, by the way, some people are asking that question because they refuse that category, and here's how they structure the thing, but it's still has to be visible as something, you know, there's a line saying some people refuse that category. And it should be visible as reified in some way that it can be seen and explored. Otherwise, what's the point? So those fringe meta views should be at the visual level collapsed into a fringe, not, you know, collapsed as a line item at the same level as a fringe view. So sorry, I'm being a bit vague here. To go back to something I want to quote from Jonathan is, he's very interesting, and I think that's a bit like Fishkin. The fringe view, is it, how informed is it? Meaning, have they ignored or refuted that argument? And he's really interesting in, maybe this is what you believe now, but it's not necessarily what you would believe if you were aware of this argument, or if you were aware of this fact, or if you believed in this fact, or if you trusted that argument. So the whole question of, he's basically arguing against raw popularity as a metric. And that's something I agree with. I don't think raw popularity is the best metric, but that's a totally different conversation. And we went into prediction scoring and all that, but that's another story again. But the notion of distinguishing informed from uninformed popularity, I think, is absolutely interesting and needs to be part of the scoring. But that's, again, layer 2.
Yeah, and that's also scoring, right? And
Yeah,
what's interesting
totally.
about, like, if we're leaving everything open to debate, including the meta structures and the curation and all that, then it's all going to come down to scoring, because that's how you're going to handle the viewing.
No question.
And then
No
and
question.
then you've got to go down to, well, you're going to have scoring, but you can have different models for the scoring.
Yep.
And what is the default model, and all those questions, right? Yeah.
What's a default model in a community? Yes. But yes, but I agree. I agree. And I think having arguments about models, but it's, I think it is, how to put it this way. I think it is possible to have, let's put it this way, informed arguments about models better than about identity politics.
Yeah. Okay, so you know, summing it up, wrapping this up a little bit, you know, I am open to accepting Stephen's base layer approach of being able to edit on old stuff, with the notion that these are the empirical questions that I want to see answered, right? The caveat there that I haven't agreed to yet would require, well, first of all, like I said, I would want to be able to run timestamp series as a measure of you know, what is current versus what is old for my second layer solution. That's not going to let people debate old stuff. But the question that hasn't been answered, and this is really kind of a graph theory thing we'd have to go through, is you know, first of all, what are the other relationships that curation related relationships that we would want to see in the base layer, and through those relationships, is every case that we want to support going to be supportable through something that doesn't cut off stuff in the past, you know? So like splitting, quote unquote splitting, all the different curation actions, you know, if an argument is over there, when somebody creates a relationship, does the argument have to be inherited, or are we going to create a new link, or, you know, all those questions would have to be answered.
Yeah, they need to be answered either way. And I mean, remember,
Right.
when this whole discussion started was simply that we disagreed that people could still add to, the only thing we've defined right now is an accepted immutable claim. So yes, we have to continue on that, but basically, if you can agree on that now, yes, we can continue and we can start talking about what is a canonical claim. How do you even say that something is a new version of, etc.? Does it live in the base layer? Does
What
it
are
live
the
in the
relations?
That's
Right,
it's just a
right.
matter of writing down all these user stories essentially and continuing to build terminology on top of that.
Yep.
And then, yeah, I fully agree that it's an empirical question that we have no final answers to. I do believe that people fundamentally want a place to go to argue. And if you don't provide that, you will have people that leave. But yeah, we need to see. We need to first see whether we have users at all.
Absolutely
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, what was
excellent.
this thing about not being able to debate old things? I'm missing context there.
The context is on the glossary meeting. Did you actually join? Yeah, some of the first glossary meetings maybe you attended, Carl.
Maybe if sorry, I don't want to like hold this up, but maybe just let me put my motivation in is that
Yeah.
I hate when I come to a Reddit post that's, what is it, 6 months where they cut things off. And they're like, you can't participate in this conversation because it's old. And I apologize if that's completely
No,
inappropriate.
that's not what.
That's not what we're talking about. No, thank God.
Okay.
What I meant is more like
Agreed.
it would be more like you go to a Reddit post and how do I say, like stuff has been moderated to the top. And it's like, no, I want to go and argue with people as if that stuff was still at the bottom or something. It's like the debate has moved on, and the question is, should you go and be able to interact still with the debate that hasn't been cleaned up? I don't know how to say that or not, but you'd obviously be able to interact. The debate is never closed. It just kind of gets cleaned up, and it's like, should I be able to interact with the old version?
Let me put this
Let
other
me-
thing in if I can. Okay, sorry.
The- the-
Hold on a
the-
second.
I think Reddit is a bad example because Reddit is a historical view
Okay.
anyway.
Obrigado.
Think more of a Google Doc. People have been working on a Google Doc for a while, and at some point, I want to comment on a previous version of the Google Doc because there's something
Right.
that was edited out, but I think requires an answer, and I want to put a comment on the historical version of the Google Doc. I think that's a better metaphor.
Yeah, suppose that there was a subsection where in an old version of the document you structured. A common problem is if you have multiple views, multiple hierarchies, like in a paper, when you're writing a paper, it's often like, how do you structure it? Like,
Wait. Yeah, it would be more like no. We're not talking about removing content because content never goes away, right? It's more like, you know, you have two paragraphs and somebody goes and reorders the paragraph, and you want to go back in time and say, I think those paragraphs should be reordered. And it's like, that's a pointless comment because it's already been reordered, right? You should interact on the structure of the new.
Yeah, for efficiency's sake, if the person had a good point, they would just have to try to reintroduce that concept. I think, like, you can't forever let things go back to the
Concept would not be
versions.
removed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the last thing I want to say about that, although it sounds like it isn't inconsistent with this, is one of my favorite Stack Overflow badges is the Necromancer badge, and it's for providing an answer. It's like 30 days or 60 days after the question was asked, and you get like more than 2 upvotes. Like basically providing a useful answer to an old question. And that's the kind of thing I would like. I personally am I kind of love providing those answers, and I would not want the system to, disallow that. Like, okay, you've moved past this, you can't. But it doesn't sound like that's a problem here.
No,
not a problem.
no.
And absolutely, not only that, we want it so that if new information comes to light, we want people to come and interact. You've made up your mind on this thing, but wait, there's new evidence, right? By 10 years later, the CIA releases these documents. You want to go back and reevaluate. So yeah.
Shall we take a step back? I don't think we need to go into detail into the glossary now, but I just want to place all this entire discussion in the context of where it came from, so we can maybe close it up and then move forward on the next Wednesday, but then we can talk the remainder of the meeting about some other stuff. So I'm just going to share the screen for the sake of Carl. Have you participated on this board before, Carl?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, exactly, your name is there. So what we did over the course of some of the previous Wednesday meetings was we now have a pretty well aligned thing called accepted immutable claim. Pretty well aligned means that the three of us have been primarily talking about that. You can have a read. You can have a read of it and see whether you agree. Oh no, sorry, it's the wrong one. We have a pretty well aligned acceptable immutable claim. Once an acceptable immutable claim has been accepted by a community, it becomes an accepted immutable claim. And then we recently started disambiguating that from a contributed immutable claim. And these are entities like terminology that is used in the current two more or less finalized user stories, where we have, as a web author, I want to link to an accepted immutable claim in a claim repository so that my readers can support and oppose that claim, which is also visible to any web content linking to it. And Timothy mentioned then, like a couple of weeks ago, hey, but I actually don't want that because I don't want the readers to continue to support or oppose that in case it's, for example, an old claim. And then we went on this whole tangent, what it means for a claim to be old and et cetera, et cetera. And my argument was basically that any notion of old we can later build upon, but that there will always be a need for readers to, if they so want to, even though we can tell them, please, we suggest you don't because there are new better forms out there, that there's no reason to stop this use case from being supported. And that's where we were. As a web author, I want to contribute an immutable claim, like a contributed immutable claim. I think we last picked up on like maybe renaming that, but that's what it's named now. To claim repository so that it may become an accepted immutable claim. So essentially, there is some basic curation process for any contribution to be accepted and become immutable. Before that, it is mutable, essentially, is all that means. And if you want to, from an external source, link to a claim that is forever there and you can link to, add content to, then it needs to be accepted in what I would then call a base layer, but that's not really the discussion here. Is that more or less clear?
I think it's clear. I mean, I have some questions about, I have to look at the definition of accepted immutable claim, because if you're preventing a web author from interacting or contributing to the system or becoming part of the larger ecosystem, just because what they would like to link to is not accepted, that sounds like a barrier to entry. But I mean, maybe you guys have discussed this and maybe.
No, it is. It is. That's part of the reason why I think a lot of what we've been doing in these discussions is defining the bare minimum level of entry. And that is acceptable immutable claim, essentially.
And basically what is unacceptable, maybe easier to understand from that point, is when it's absolutely not clear that there's a claim there.
Yeah, essentially that's
or what the claim is.
You can read them, but it's indeed, it should be a minimal level of entry where out of context you can simply say, yeah, this can be accepted, like, and then you can maybe remove the typos, you can remove indexical references, stuff like that. You can have a read through on your own through this and the entire discussion that underlies it. And we can do a recap on Wednesday if you want to be filled in or you have questions. But this was just to give the context of this discussion. I was talking about being able to contribute to old claims or not.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so we have 15 minutes. Maybe we should get into more planning. What is the next step? Do we continue with the user stories, which I think is useful? I'm interested, and maybe that I should make that the next Friday activities, in the modeling of what are the links between concepts that are needed for the base layer. And that's a modeling. And then that could go in parallel with the user stories, so we could see, are the links enough to express the user stories and vice versa? How do you feel about that?
Well, it depends what you mean by links. For me, I typically go in the opposite way. I have user stories and then I try to model it, and then you see, is the model sufficient to support the user stories? But
fair enough. Listen, we can do that. It's
I think the model is always going to run ahead in a way, because we all have very, it's weird, it's counterintuitive, but we all have been doing way more modeling than thinking about the user stories in detail, so to speak.
It's true. A lot of our user stories are post hoc.
Yeah.
But it's also true that we do these models because we have unstated user stories in mind.
Yeah, of course.
Eh,
They're all based on an implicit understanding of
mental
what
model.
we want to do, but we need to make it very explicit in order to understand each other and see whether or not
Yes.
we can share models and which models to share. So, yeah.
I agree, but the point is clear communication. It's not that we don't have the user stories in our mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's Wednesdays, right? So I don't know. There's also the new social protocols topic that
How do you feel about your day, Tim? Your day used to be Tuesday. I still think of it as first day of the week. So do we still want to do this one day per person thing? I still think it's useful to have many approaches, like kind of bottom up, top down. I still think it's useful to go at it from both ends, but that's me. Do we still want that as a group?
I think it's also very useful at avoiding conflict, because one person can pull rank when necessary to move on.
Yeah.
So it's been good. You know, my days are complicated lately, but and now I'm overlapping with the moderation discussions, right? But yeah, I think it's a good thing.
But what I'm saying is, at this point, I don't like the idea of the community forking, to be honest. I don't like the idea of there being, oh, should I go to the social protocol day or to the other day? I'd rather spend 2 hours on one day, for example. I don't know if that's realistic, but
wouldn't be the first time.
What?
It wouldn't be the first time we've done that. We've very commonly done 1 hour and a half at least.
Yep, exactly. And I'm, I speak of top down, bottom up. We had kind of 3 approaches because Stephen was pushing the user story based, which again, I think has enormous value. I was pushing a model kind of top down,
Theory,
but also model based, and I intend to do more of that, but I've run behind at this point. There are conundrums I'm facing that I've partially cracked, but not fully. So I've been unable to lead the way I want. Though I still think it has value to have days where I expose those problems. At least for me. Tim, what was your day about aside you leading?
Modeling efforts in the past.
It was supposed to be about modeling, but I think we got stuck in the low-level modeling because I think we should step back and work with Stephen on the use cases before we go further into modeling. But that being said, it's also been about tackling all the hard problems that we hadn't tackled yet, which is what makes a claim canonical, or how to model canonicality. And the one that is really big also on this list would be how to structure a definition, right? And we've talked about that somewhat, but we've scratched the surface of that. And I would want to get deeper into that, and I'm not sure how it would play out in terms of the definitional claims and all that stuff. So I'd like to keep going down those paths. Another one is curation, but I think curation, I would like to define the curation, the dictionary of curation operations. I would like to have those in our back pocket for when we start to debate about how curation should be done. We have the list of things that we would want to have done. I would want to have the list of evolving a list of heuristics for what make a debate better, whatever that may mean. And I would want to also have the list of curation actions as input into, well, what are the events like if we're doing event streaming, right? So those are all different things that are still on my list to get to that I would be happy to have a day to tackle.
The curation, I think, fits well with the use case because the curation actions are use cases, whereas the kind of what's a definition, how does a definition interact, blah, 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 it fits well with the kind of top-down modeling I was trying to do. And when I said, let's have a list of the relations we see between concepts, for me, that was another name for what you just named as what is the model between this and that. I'm trying to have a quote unquote ontology of claims and this is claim and relations between concepts. And this is what I think it's the same project there, as opposed to the curation, which also interests me, but I think it's more use case based. So maybe we can divide our time in two, and then we could, within those two sessions, maybe make them a bit longer if we can, I don't know. Within those two sessions, one that is more, let's put it, user action based and use case based, and one that is more kind of modeling, but in the sense of like conceptual modeling of what's a concept and what's a topic and what's a definition and what's this and what's that. And even if, let's not go too fast into computer modeling, we could try to share power within those two approaches. And even if we need, again, alternate day, right? Somehow, like within those two approaches. What do you think?
Right. I don't know what concretely that means in terms of a change, but it sounds good to me.
Okay, let me try to be more concrete. Let's say Wednesday, we do user stories, but Tim and Steven, maybe alternate days like every other week. And
but already
Friday,
now, like a lot of the user story discussions have delved into the more conceptual modeling-ish and the need for things that need to be defined. So in a way, we're already doing that, I think, what you're suggesting. So yeah, I'm fully on board with that.
Good. Yeah, and I was saying Friday, let's do more modeling oriented than between Tim and I. And I mean, I don't want to exclude, like if you want to take a Friday or if I want to take a Wednesday because I want to look at more, user story approach, whatever, right?
Yeah, we can always be flexible.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have a plan.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's not yet the hour, but I think we have a stop. What do you think?
Well, I'd love to hear an update on Carl's end, to be honest, because we haven't seen you in ages. How are you? Congratulations.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I'm now married. Moved into a new place. I thought that all the work was going to be before the marriage and before moving, but turns out there's a ton to do, and there's also performance time at the company, so I was pretty busy. So sorry for my absence. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back in. I still have some sort of trailing, honey-do list items around our home, and I'm sort of at a segue with, or not segue, at a branch with work. They're like, should I invest more time? I think I'm going to try and pull back from work so that I have more time to dedicate here. But yeah, it's kind of like my update. So
cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Congrats. Yeah.
Thanks. It was a nice ceremony.
Okay. I guess we're done now then, or
yeah, let's wrap up.
See you on Wednesday.
See you on Wednesday.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.